The film starts on July 4, 1969, with the Zodiac killer's second attack. He shoots Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau on a lover's lane in Vallejo, then calls 911 to report his crime. Mageau survives, but Ferrin dies from her injuries. 4 weeks later, the San Francisco Chronicle receives a letter from the Zodiac, which includes an encrypted message and a threat to kill again unless the letter is published in the newspaper. Similar demands are also sent in encrypted letters to the Vallejo Times and the San Francisco Examiner. Avery, a crime reporter for the Chronicle, begins investigating the case. Robert Graysmith, the Chronicle's political cartoonist, takes an interest in the encrypted letter, which is eventually cracked by a history teacher in Salinas, California. However, some letters remain unsolved, prompting Graysmith to try to decipher them, which draws Avery's attention. Avery also notices one of the symbols that looks like a heart or firearm sighting device. In September 1969, the Zodiac killer confronts and stabs Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa in Napa County. Shepard dies from her injuries, but Hartnell survives. The Zodiac then sends another letter to the Chronicle, referencing the most dangerous game. Later, San Francisco taxi driver Paul Stane is shot and killed in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Detectives Dave Tosh and Bill Armstrong from the San Francisco Police Department take on the case but are initially unaware that the Zodiac is responsible. Soon, the Chronicle receives another letter from the Zodiac, containing a piece of the taxi driver's bloody shirt and a threat to attack school buses. Tosh and Armstrong begin coordinating with other detectives, including Jack Mullinax from Vallejo and Ken Narlo from Napa, to review the Zodiac case evidence. While the SFPD obtained a partial fingerprint from the taxicab crime scene, Narlo describes how a ranger accidentally destroyed the crime scene in Napa. They did, however, come across Wing Walker, footprints on the ground with the footwear available only with the military ID. Armstrong attempts to interview Mike Mageau, a survivor of the Zodiac's second murder, but Vallejo police inform him that he is no longer in town. Because much of the material evidence must be sent exclusively via postal mail, the various police departments are also having difficulty communicating with one another. Question the Zodiac's motives in private conversations. The cab driver is his first non-couple killing, leading the two groups of men to believe he's breaking his pattern. Soon after, the Zodiac, or someone claiming to be him, requests to speak on an early morning talk show with celebrity lawyer Melvin Belli. A man with a deep voice calling himself Sam calls in. Sam accepts Melvin's invitation to meet at a Daly City church. Melvin and the SFPD ran to the scene, but Sam was nowhere to be found, and it was quickly revealed that the caller was from a mental institution. Even Brian Hartnell, a survivor of the Zodiac's third killing, confirms that the voice is not that of the man he met at Lake Berryessa. Another letter arrives at the Chronicle soon after, taunting the cops and including instructions for making an explosive device. About their interest in the letters, Graysmith explains how his love of puzzles drew him to the challenge of deciphering the Zodiac ciphers. He also describes several different codes he discovered in the letters, including one referred to as the alphabet of the Zodiac. The Zodiac writes a letter to Melvin Belli for Christmas in 1969 and continues to write letters to the Chronicle throughout the spring and summer of 1970, taunting the police and claiming responsibility for several incidents. After Avery questions the Zodiac's ferocity, the Chronicle decides to discontinue publication of the letters. Paul also tells Graysmith that the gun sight symbol on the letters appears to have been copied from the Zodiac brand of watch. Avery tells several unflattering stories about the Zodiac and is rewarded with a personal letter from the Zodiac, as well as a piece of the cab driver's bloody shirt. Paul tries to learn more about the Zodiac and meets with an unnamed source in Riverside, California. Avery believes he has discovered evidence of the Zodiac's first murder victim, which occurred before the 1969 shooting of Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau. Toshi and Armstrong are dispatched to Riverside to investigate. The evidence appears to be similar, but they ruled out an exact match to their killer. However, Paul Avery's stories sway the majority of the audience, infuriating Toshi. Avery's article quickly draws a slew of people to Toshi and the SFPD, many of whom claim to know the identity of the Zodiac. One of the interviews about a man named Arthur Lee Allen appears to be the most promising. Toshi and Mullinax then question Arthur but find nothing concrete. They interview several members of Arthur's family who provide handwriting samples for analysis. However, a review of the letters by handwriting expert Sherwin Morrill reveals no connections. Arthur's family eventually informs Toshi and Armstrong that he is relocated to Santa Rosa. The Santa Rosa Police Department issues a warrant, and Toshi and Armstrong search Arthur's trailer. They discover several weapons and confront Arthur when he returns home. However, after obtaining a new handwriting sample and checking his prints, nothing of Arthur's matches any of the information on file for Zodiac, infuriating Toshi that his best lead had failed. Toshi and his wife go to see the film Dirty Harry to unwind. Tashi meets Graysmith in the lobby after it concludes. Robert assures Tashi that he will catch the Zodiac, but Tashi appears skeptical. 1975 is 4 years later. Graysmith has remarried and begun a family since that time. Meanwhile, Paul Avery's sanity has taken a hit as he has left the Chronicle to work for the Sacramento Bee. Dave Tashi is taken aback when his partner Bill Armstrong informs him that he is leaving homicide and joining the fraud division. The Zodiac has remained silent during this time. When Graysmith's wife, Melanie, mentions all the Zodiac memorabilia he's amassed over the years, Robert visits Paul and expresses his desire to write a book about the Zodiac. Robert's expectations are dashed when Paul informs him that he no longer has any information on the killer. Next, Robert asks Dave Tashi a question. Tashi advises Robert to contact Ken Narlow in Napa, even though he swears he can't help. Robert is given access by Narlow to examine the Napa police's evidence in the case of Darlene Ferrin and Mike McGough. The Zodiac might have been one of Darlene's admirers. Robert goes on to say to Tashi, noting that she appeared to have a large following. Graysmith was more convinced that the murderer knew Darlene. Because of strange phone calls to several of her relatives that night who had heavy breathing on the line, Robert insists that he must locate Darlene's sister, but Tashi also suggests that he speak with Melvin Belli. When Robert visits the lawyer, he has an unusual conversation with one of his housekeepers, during which she reveals that the Zodiac spoke to her. The Zodiac instructed the housekeeper that Mr. Belli was out of the house and that he had to kill that day, because it was his birthday. With the help of this evidence, Robert can focus on the dates of December 18th through December 20th. Tashi advises him to check the Department of Justice for information, but he receives little assistance. Soon after, Bob receives a call from a man claiming that the Zodiac is Rick Marshall and that Bob Vaughn has film canisters containing proof that Rick is the Zodiac, and fingerprints. During the conversation, Sherwood describes how Wallace Penny told him Rick Marshall was the Zodiac, shocking Robert by revealing that the same person who called Robert also spoke to Sherwood. When the SFPD receives its first Zodiac letter in 4 years, Tashi is summoned back there. Tashi, however, is dismissed from the Homicide Division as a result of the accusations that he forged the letter. Tashi tries to engage Robert in conversation, but Dave won't discuss after that. Robert visits Napa and talks to Ken Narlow. Narlow describes how he spoke with Rick Marshall, but was unable to obtain any samples of his handwriting or fingerprints. Robert calls Morrill to track down Marshall and get Wallace Penny's contact information. Wallace provides Robert with a movie theater poster design he claims was created by Rick Marshall. Morrill examines it, noting a few minor similarities to the Zodiac style, but requires more details for a thorough assessment. This investigation consumes Robert's life. His wife leaves with their children after he loses his job at the Chronicle, fearing that the Zodiac might target their family. Robert also receives a disturbing call where the caller simply breathes heavily and then hangs up. Robert continues his search, asking Bob Vaughn for help and attempting to locate Linda, Darlene Ferrin's sister. When Robert describes the posters they're reviewing for evidence, Bob claims that he designed all the posters himself, not Rick Marshall, even though Vaughn knew Rick as a theater projectionist years ago. Feeling confused and uncertain, Robert quickly leaves the area. Later, Robert visits Linda, who is now in prison, to ask about a painting party where a man supposedly made Darlene uncomfortable. Robert believes the man is Rick Marshall, but Linda denies knowing anyone by that name. Robert then rushes to Tashi's house in the middle of the night, convinced that Arthur Lee Allen is the Zodiac. Tashi eventually agrees to meet with him, and at a restaurant, Robert outlines several factors linking Arthur to the Zodiac. Tashi, however, insists that all of Robert's evidence is only circumstantial. Some people had even suspected that the Zodiac might have been someone Darlene knew since Arthur lived near her workplace, but Tashi can't confirm anything Robert claims. The scene shifts to December 1983, where Robert enters a hardware store in Vallejo and briefly encounters Arthur Lee Allen without saying a word. 8 years later, in 1991, Mike Maggio meets with the police and reviews a series of mugshots. When asked to identify the man most likely to be the Zodiac, Maggio points to Arthur Lee Allen. That's a wrap on today's movie recap. If you enjoyed the breakdown and want to see more, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you get all the updates. Let me know in the comments what movie you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.